What's up, guys? We are back with another video. Today we got a classic one today, and we got a lot to talk about because the truck that I'm showing today is really mind-boggling as far as the scales they was making them in. It's so confusing, and I just don't understand why these things ended up in such a disarray the way they did, but I'm going to get into this video and we're going to break some of this stuff down because a lot of this really is kind of crazy. So let's get into the video. So here we have two Lincoln Navigators, okay? And everybody knows Lincoln, this is their first SUV, their very first SUV. And it really kind of changed the game in the SUV community. The Navigator was always their top of the line SUV in the lineup. Well, it was their only SUV in the lineup, so it became a flagship of their company, and it all started in 1998. And for some people, Lincoln was always a company based on luxury. It was always based on style. It was always based on elegance. That's what Lincoln stood for. When the SUV came out, it changed the game. It changed a lot because Lincoln was always a company that was based on their cars, and they spanned back a long time. And they were pushing the envelope when they decided they wanted to come out with their very first SUV. And so this is what the result of it was. Their first generation Lincoln Navigator. Now I'm going to take this wrap off of these because I want you to see them out of the wrap. Just see what they look like. And so there's the first one. And let's take this one out of the wrap as well. And there's the second one. Okay. So you got two Lincoln Navigators here. Now, here's the thing that I want to say about Lincoln. I fell in love with this Navigator when it first hit the scene in '98. I saw it one day going up a highway, and I can't remember where I was, but back in '98, I was 18 and things like that, and I saw this truck going up a highway one day because I was on a service road somewhere, and when it caught my eye, I said to myself, what is that? It was big and it looked good, and I'm like, and when I saw it, I was like, what is that? I caught the tail end of it going up the highway, and I was like, what kind of truck is that? And I knew it was something new because it was something different, something I had never seen before. So it caught my eye, and I believe like later on down the line, I found out that it was Lincoln's first SUV, the Navigator. And when I saw it, I fell in love with it. I definitely fell in love with it because it was something different. It was definitely something different. And it was my dream truck. It was my dream truck. So I had one back around 2020, and I'm gonna show you the pics here. Here it is. And so, as you can see, it was a little rough, but I had bought it from somebody, and they put these what's the name of those square pipes? I cannot remember the name of them right now, but he put some square pipes on it, so it had double pipes coming out the side, and it sounds so good. Like, it really sounded so good, and I was just happy to have my dream truck. But let me give you a little breakdown of the history of this Lincoln Navigator, because we got a lot of things to talk about as far as this, because this truck, as far as the diecast segment goes, it is so confusing and it's so shocking to me, because the 1/24 scale is by far my favorite scale, right? But when it comes to the Navigator specifically, there are so many flaws when it comes to making this truck in the diecast scale, because there was so many inconsistencies with this, and we're going to break it down, because they didn't do a good job as far as doing the generations of the Navigator in the different scales. It was just like they had some here in this scale, some there in that scale, this generation in that scale, that generation in that scale. It was so messy, and it didn't give the diecast world a lot to work with. So we're gonna get into that, but before we do that, like I usually say in the beginning of my videos, and I forgot to say it, make sure y'all like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Turn on your post notifications so that anytime I drop a video, you guys be the first to see it. So let's get into this, right? So the Lincoln Navigator was introduced in 1998. It was a pioneering vehicle in the full-size luxury SUV segment, marking Lincoln's first foray into the SUV market. It's their very first one. It was based on the Ford Expedition, we all know that, Ford and Lincoln together, and offered a blend of luxury capability and size that was new to the market. Now, this truck has got so much space on the inside, it is crazy. Like, it's big, big. Quickly becoming a success and setting a trend that other manufacturers would follow. See, and that's what I was talking about. Like, by Lincoln coming out with their first SUV, you remember there were a lot of other car companies that came with their first SUV. We remember Cadillac came out with their first SUV with the Escalade, and then Porsche came out with their first one, which was the Cayenne, and there were a lot of other car companies who never had an SUV in their lineup ever to come out with their very first SUV. And we could keep going down the line of all the companies that did it, but Lincoln started it and everybody else started to follow suit. So the Navigator was one of the first full-size luxury SUVs, essentially creating the segment it would dominate for years. And as I said, it comes down to a lot of different generations. But we're gonna explain in a few minutes why it's so confusing, not just in the diecast market, but in the real world with the different generations, because it's so confusing as to how they categorize some of these different generations. Is kind of crazy. So we know it shared the platform with the Ford Expedition. We know that it just looks like an Expedition, but just a little more subtle differences and amenities as far as luxury goes, but everything was basically the same, exactly the same as the Expedition. Like I said, just subtle differences and changes. But if you look at them today, they definitely vary in difference and look mostly, basically, almost like the platforms we know are still the same. They still share the same platforms, but the differences are subtle. You know, they do make differences in them and stuff like that. So we definitely, as time went on and as the years went by, Lincoln really started to separate themselves from the Expedition, and now you can really see the difference to where Lincoln is really starting to separate themselves from looking like the Ford Expedition. Navigator has seen multiple generations, with each bringing updates to styling, technology, and features. And when it started off, it had the V8, a 5.4 liter V8. And the Navigator has evolved to include features like independent rear suspension, advanced infotainment systems, and even a longer wheelbase version, the Navigator L. Now, we all know that the Navigator started off as one size, but as the generation started to evolve, the Navigator became not just one size, it came in two sizes. It's almost like going to a Chevy dealer and saying, I want the Tahoe, but then somebody says, I want the Suburban. It's kind of like that, you know, where the Tahoe is the short version and the Suburban is the long version. So it's just like that. So the Navigator had a regular size, and then you had the L, which was the extended version. And you know that I used the Chevy Tahoe and the Suburban as a comparison because it's the same exact thing. So here's where I want to go deep into the conversation. Now, the Lincoln Navigator had 5 generations, right? 5 generations. 5. But here's where the confusion starts. So we're going to go ahead and get into the generations, the different generations of the Lincoln Navigator. And this is where a lot of the confusion starts. So I'm going to pull up a picture of the first generation, which is this one here. As you can see, I have them on the table right here. This is the first generation, but I'm going to pull up a picture of the first generation in real life. So this is the first generation here. This is the first generation, which was from 98 to 2002. Okay, this is what started it all. This is the truck that changed the game for a lot of other companies that would follow suit later on behind Lincoln. And this was generation 1, right? Okay, so we see that. Now, let us check out the second generation, which is this one. Now, this is the second generation, which started from 2002 to 2006, but the model years was 2003 to 2006, right? Now, as you can look at this one, it looks similar to the old one, but you could see that the headlights are much bigger than the previous model. The first model that came out, the headlights are bigger. First generation, the headlights were smaller. Also, if you look at the rear of this Lincoln, the tail lights got smaller, whereas the first generation tail lights were bigger. So it's like they switched. You know, the first Navigator had big tail lights and small headlights, where the second generation has big headlights and small tail lights. So they just kind of changed it up a little bit, but it still kind of looks like the first generation. Is just like they kind of refreshed it, but they call this the second generation, right? All right, now let's look at the third generation. The third generation went from August 2006 to July of 2017. Now, here's where the confusion starts, because now you're saying the third generation was from 2006 to 2017. I'm trying to wrap my head around this, because if you look back at the second generation looks like the first one, but it just looks like a little bit of a refresh, where it looks very similar to the first one. But then you go to the third generation from 2006 to 2017, and then you see what this third generation looks like. You can see it. I'm going to show you a picture here. Now, the picture here shows the third generation. You can see how it looks, the front. Okay, this is a picture of the front. And then I'm going to show you a picture of the rear. Now, this is the way it looks from the rear, right? And this is the third generation. But now, also in that same generation, they had another look to it. Now, I'm going to show you this one. So, this one here is also a third generation, but they call it a refresh, right? I'm trying to figure out here, how is that a refresh if you looking at two different trucks with two different looks? One was from, they say it was from 2006 to 2017. But if you got two trucks that look completely different from each other, one's a whole new refresh, how is that the same generation with a new refresh when the second and first generation kind of look almost the same, but those are two different generations, and you have a generation here in the third one with two trucks that look totally different from each other, from headlights to tail lights to looks? Could anybody explain that to me?
What?
So now we check out the fourth generation. That's what they say. And okay, you call it the fourth generation. I don't think it's a fourth generation. I see it as a fifth generation. But now let's look at the fourth generation. So the fourth generation was from 2018 to 2024. Now I'm going to put you to the SUVs. Now, let's look at the fourth generation once again. This is the look of it. Fourth generation, which actually should have been a fifth, for real, for real. This was made from 2018 to 2024. Now, the third generation is where the L series started. It started with the very last one, the one that had the very first one, the very first generation that they claimed so-called was a refresh, right? So the first third generation was where the L started. It had an extended version and it had a short version. And then the so-called refresh, which I felt should have been the fourth generation instead of it being 2/3 but having two different looks, is also the one that had an extended version and a regular size version. And then you fast forward to the fourth generation, which was also an extended version and a short version, right? Then we go ahead and fast forward to the fifth generation, or what we say the generation of now, which is 2025. And here is the 2025 Lincoln Navigator, which looks awesome. I mean, I love everything about this 2025. It's a beautiful truck. And I mean, you're talking about a truck that is well into the 100,000s. No doubt. It's beautiful. And it all this Navigator does, it just keeps evolving and evolving and evolving. And this has become their flagship truck of Lincoln. This has been the flagship of Lincoln, period. You know, ever since the Lincoln Town Car has, you know, been erased from Lincoln. You know, they haven't brought it back since the early 2000s. And so the Navigator has been surpassing that, and it's been their flagship ever since. But you can see how beautiful this 2025 is. I love it. I love it. I love it. Now that we got that out the way, let's start with a little more confusion. Yes, a little more confusion is what I said. What? So, now, let's get down to it, because we got some things that we need to talk about as far as this diecast thing goes. And now we about to break down this diecast thing, which is, in my mind, very crazy and mind-boggling, because they did really a poor job of really trying to distribute the Navigator into these scales and these diecasts, which I think was a travesty in itself, because some scales got certain models where other scales didn't. You know, everybody doesn't, you know, buy certain scales, where there might be people who just fortunately love 118s, where some people just love 124s and would love to have their favorites in that scale. But Navigator did not do that. So let's get into it. So as you can see, the first generation here started off in a 124, right? We get that. Beautiful, love it, right? So now I'm gonna put up a picture of, well, I don't have to put up a picture of the first generation, because the first generation is right here in your face. So that's the first generation. This was the first one, right? And this is what we were looking for when it came to the first generation. And yes, this is it. Now, let's go to the second generation. The second generation was 2003, right? The refresh, the big headlights, small tail lights. That's the second generation. Now, I'm going to show you a picture of the second generation. So the second generation came out in the 124 scale, which they had Jada Dub City, which is right here. I have a sample picture. You got this one right here, this blue one, which is, you can see Dub City written across it. It was a Jada model. It was 124. This also came in a 118 scale, right? Now, let's put up another picture. Here's another picture of the second generation. And this is also a Jada, which is the limo, right? Here we go. Once again, we have it in 124 scale. Like I said, they also had this in 118 scale. So, that's good. Like I said, once again, beautiful truck. They did all the wonders to it. Now, let's go to the third generation. Now, the third generation is where things start to get a little tricky here, because the third generation was never made as a 124 diecast, but they did do a third generation in remote control, right? And I'm gonna put this picture up here. So I'm gonna put this first picture up, which is this one here. So they had the Lincoln Navigator in 124 scale, but it was an RC. Okay, it's an RC, but what happened to the diecast section of that? You see, where's the diecast part of this third generation? And this is what I'm talking about. The diecast third generation should have been here, but you got a diecast third generation in a remote control. Please explain that to me. What? Let's go back. Now, we have another picture, which is here. Here's another third generation, and that's also a remote control. The third generation never came in a diecast. It was a remote control. That's the only one that they ever done in a remote control of the third generation. We didn't get the third generation in a 118. We didn't get the third generation in a diecast 124. It came as a remote control car. Hello. Then, in that same third generation, the refresh, as they call it, we have these. Now, here's another example of what I'm talking about. You got the third generation, and these three right here, they're beautiful, right? Awesome. I like the way they look. But these are not 124s. These are not 118s. They are 136 to 143. They did not make these in 124 scale. They did not make these in 118 scale. 136 to 143. These are very small, guys. Please explain to me why these weren't made in 124 scale. Can somebody explain this to me, please? Why aren't these made in 124 or 118 scale? For me specifically, 124. They never existed. What? Now, let's go to the next generation, which was the fourth generation. Now, the fourth generation was absolutely made. So the fourth generation was made, but it was only made in 118. We didn't get a 124 scale at all of this model. You could find plenty of 118 scales of the fourth generation. Fourth generation only exists in 118. They don't have it in 124. So again, why does this fourth generation not exist at all in 124 scale? What are we doing here? Why do we not have this for the people who only concern themselves with 124 scales, like myself? Why is it that 118 is the only scale that got this? Can somebody explain to me why we don't have that? And so, the fifth generation, unfortunately, nobody has that. It has not been made. It is yet to be made. So, we don't know what that is, or when, or if they'll even make that in a certain scale. But this is the travesty that I'm talking about when it comes to Lincoln. It's just like their diecasts were all over the place. I don't know why this was so tragic and terrible like this, but yeah, it didn't. I did not understand why it wasn't made. It's just all over the place. It's all over the place. I don't get it. I don't understand. But nonetheless, I just wish they could have done a better job at doing this in two major scales. At least with the generations coming down the line, they should have did this in the two major scales, being 124 and 118. You're gonna get some in 164 and 136 and 143. You know, they like to do it in those smaller scales. But what about 124 and 118, the most important scales, the scales that people really adapt to, the scales that people really love? I just think they were all over the place, and these diecast companies, I just don't understand why they didn't take on the challenge of being able to provide us with these generations of Lincolns that we should have had in our collection. You stuff us with the first generation and the second generation. You turn the third generation into a remote control only. You take the fourth, part of the third generation, and make that small, and don't make it in 124 and 118. And then you take the fourth generation, and the fourth generation is only in 118, and the fifth generation is yet to be made. So we don't even know if that's going to even come out. But it's just all over the place. It's just ridiculous how they do that, because us as consumers, we would like to have those certain models in our collection. I know I would. I would love to have every generation of the Navigator in my collection in 124 scale. I would love to have that. But unfortunately, I can't, because they didn't make it. And a lot of them don't exist in such scale. So I have to live with that. But here you can see I have two of the first generations. And this one over here in particular was done by Motor Max. Now this one here came with these wheels, and as you can see, there are some subtle differences in this truck, and you can actually look and see. I did do modifications to this one, but I have done absolutely no modifications to the one on the right. Everything you see is exactly how it came. Okay, so you can see the subtle differences with these two. Let's start with the front, and you can see that the grills are different colors. As you can see, this one has a black grill, this one has a chrome grill, and same thing up top. The luggage rack, this one is chrome and this one is black. So there's another difference. Now, like I said, this one here was modified. So I did change out the wheels on this. It did have the factory wheels and I didn't like them, so I did change them out. I did a little work underneath and was able to put some custom wheels on it. So that I did do. Also, I did do the seats on the inside. I did the painting of the seats on the inside. So that was another thing I did. Those are the custom wheels that I put on it. Also, I did put some custom exhaust pipes on the back. I did do that. So let's look at the rear of both, and you can see the difference also as well. The chrome wrap around the license plate, you can see where the reverse lights is chrome on this one, and this one you can see is plain black. So there's a difference in the two. Also, if you look at the, yeah, I think with this one I also, well, with this one I also did paint the running boards black, because I wanted the whole truck to be black. So I did paint the running boards black. The only thing I did not touch is this part right here on the front. I did not touch that. Well, as you can see on this one, is all the same color, even down at the bottom. So that's the difference. Also, I did paint the bottom of this one, so that is black. Like I said, this part right here is the only part I did not touch. But you can also see that the colors of the interior are different. This one has a tan interior, which it came like this. It's a tan interior. I didn't make this tan. The only thing I'd added was the black on the seats. But this one also has a white interior. As you can see, the interior in this one is white. So this one definitely has a different color interior than the other one over there. And here are the custom wheels that came on this truck. So it's definitely different from the other one here. And like I said, I love Navigator, and you know, I've been rocking with Navigator ever since they debuted in '98. I would say that all of their generations I rock with. I think the only generation I don't rock with so much is probably the second generation. I think because I don't like how they made the headlights wider, like they made the headlights bigger. I think it looks more Lincoln-like when you got the headlights smaller and the grill kind of protruding over it. That was kind of like Lincoln's stance, especially with the Lincoln Town Car. That was their stance. Like they had the big grill and the small headlights on the side of it. So when the first generation Lincoln came out, it just made a statement with the way the front looks. But it's just like when they decided that they wanted to go big on the headlights, it just kind of threw everything off. So I wasn't a big fan of that. So the second generation pretty much was the only generation I really didn't like that much. But all the other generations that followed, yes, I love them. I love them. And me personally, I just think the third generation, it confuses me so much. I just think the third generation was, to me, really, to me, in my personal opinion, it should have been 2 generations instead of 1, because we're looking at 2 different trucks. The third generation just don't look like the other one in that same generation. Because when you look at the second generation and the first generation, they look alike. The only thing is they just made the headlights smaller and made a couple of differences. Now that's what you call a refresh, because it looks exactly like the first one, but they just made a couple of differences. Where in the third generation, they look totally different. The grill looks different. The way the truck looks is different. The tail lights look different and everything. Like it just looks completely different from the third. The 2 in the third generation look completely different from each other. So I feel like those 2 should have been apart from each other and made different generations. I think the third generation should have been split in 2. The very first one that came out with the chrome grille, that should have been 1 generation. And then the other one that came out where the grille actually separates apart, that should have been its own generation. So instead of looking at 5 generations of the Navigator, we actually would have been looking at 6. We would have been looking at 6 generations instead of 5. But they categorize it as 5. Personally, in my opinion, to me, I think it should have been 6. Because the third generation, to me, should have been split up into 2. They call it a refresh, but to me, it's not a refresh when you make the truck look totally different from the other one. You call that a refresh, but your second and first generation damn near look alike. To me, the first and second generation was a refresh. That was more or less a refresh. The third generation, the 2 in the third generation, to me, that's not a refresh, because they made that truck look totally different from that same truck in that same generation. You know, so I think they just got it confused and everything. To me, a refresh is kind of like when you're doing the same thing. As far as these car companies, a refresh is kind of like when you do the same thing, but you just make little subtle differences. You just make little changes here and there. But when you're talking about a generation, that means a total change. And those 2 in the third generation don't look the same. It's a total change. So I think they should have been generational instead of a refresh. A refresh is what you see as far as first and second generation. That's a refresh, because they look exactly alike, but you can see the subtle differences. Where the third one, it just, I don't know, it's so confusing. But anyway, here is the bottom of the third. Here's the bottom of this one here. As you can see, it says 1998 Lincoln Navigator, scale 124. And the bottom of this one says the same thing. So, you know, there's, like I said, it's definitely a difference with these 2. And this one was in a box, and it was called the Max design. So they actually have a Expedition also that looks just like this with the same wheels and everything. With this one, just came in a regular box. In Motor Max, they did this one in a regular box, but this one didn't say Max design. This one did, only because it had the the total upgrade in the wheels and interior color and the color of the grill, the differences and things like that. So that was the difference with that. So like I said, man, I feel like they should have just done something different with this whole diecast thing involving Lincoln Navigators. I just think it was just totally out of whack how they just categorized this different stuff. It just, to me, it's just a travesty how they just butchered these diecasts for Lincoln Navigators in particular, because I feel like all the generations definitely should have been done in 124 and 118 scale, no doubt. But instead they make certain generations in certain scales where others don't have access to that, and it's just kind of crazy. And then, not to mention, the first generation also had a 118 scale, and I forgot to show y'all that. I had a 118 scale of this one a long time ago, which I thought was so cool. And here it is right here. Here's the first generation Navigator. This one was made by Auto Art. And Auto Art did such a marvelous job at doing this Navigator first generation in 118 scale. I mean, you put your hand in there, you start rubbing on the carpet, it just felt like real carpet. And they pay so much attention to detail, it don't even make no sense. So yes, I had a 118 scale of this particular Navigator back in the day. I don't have it anymore, but it was a beautiful truck when I did have it. So yeah. But that's enough of my ranting and raving, and I just showed y'all my Lincoln Navigators from the first generation, the birth of Lincoln in their first SUV. Well, not the birth of Lincoln, but the birth of Lincoln's first SUV. That's what I meant to say. And let me know in the comments about this whole travesty, about this whole thing, about this diecast mess that Lincoln just kind of butchered, not being able to have access to certain generations, for people to be able to enjoy having, all 4 to 5 generations, well, really should have been 6, in their collection. Why did they limit us to only certain models of certain kinds? Why did we only get the 3rd generation as a remote control car? Why did we get that same 3rd generation, which they call a refresh, in 136 and 143, but no access to 118 or 124? Why did we get the 4th generation only in a 118 and not 124? Who knows? We don't know, and we probably never will. But anyway, that's the end of my video. I hope you guys liked my ranting and raving and this history and how everything is broken down. Like I said, you guys, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Turn on your post notifications so that anytime I drop a video, you guys be the first to see it. And with that being said, I'm going to let you guys go. But stay healthy, stay prayed up, and stay safe. And good day.